Begin tonight with the bombshell news that President Trump's longtime lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, has agreed to testify in public next month before the Congressional Oversight Committee. And he appears ready to really set the record straight. Talk about great television to come. As Cohen said in his statement today, I look forward to having the privilege of being afforded a platform with which to give a full and credible account of the events which have transpired. Well, it comes just 1 month before Cohen himself begins serving a 3-year term in prison. With nothing left to lose, he's already being compared to former White House counsel John Dean, who broke ranks with President Nixon in 1973 to reveal the full extent of the Watergate cover-up. Nixon, of course, was forced out of office the next year. And now Cohen is in a position to deliver a similar blow to President Trump under oath and on live TV. In fact, Cohen has already implicated the president in at least one felony. Well, last month, Cohen admitted to breaking campaign finance laws to suppress the stories of 2 women alleging affairs with Donald Trump, and said he did so at the direction of this president.
He directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters. I gave loyalty to someone who truthfully does not deserve loyalty.
He was trying to hide what you were doing, correct?
Correct.
And he knew it was wrong?
Of course.
Well, despite the political and legal damage that Cohen could well inflict on his former boss, Trump today tried to downplay the threat Cohen poses to him and to his presidency.
And Mr. President, back in Washington, there's some big news about Michael Cohen, who's agreed to testify before the House Democrats next month. What do you think of that? Are you worried about it?
And I'm not worried about it at all, no.
However, Cohen appears ready and willing to tell all. And when it comes to Trump's potential involvement with Russia, we already know he's got a lot to say. According to a memo from the special counsel last month, Cohen, quote, has provided information about attempts by Russian nationals to reach the campaign, as well as, quote, useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters. Even more damning when it comes to Russia is that Cohen says Trump is not telling the truth.
The special counsel did say that you were doing your best to tell the truth about everything related to their investigation, everything related to Russia. Do you think President Trump is telling the truth about that?
No.
Well, I'm joined right now by Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee. Natasha Bertrand is a staff writer for The Atlantic. The Reverend Al Sharpton is host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC. And Glenn Kirshner is a former federal prosecutor. Reverend, you have a unique relationship to talk about. How much do you think Cohen wants to tell all?
I think he wants to tell all because Cohen, when I met with him the couple of breakfast meetings we had, Cohen, aside from the fact that he has nothing to lose, knows this is history, and he doesn't want his kids to see him in history in the way he's been projected by this president. I think he's going to do the right thing for his family. He's going to tell all, and unlike John Dean, he has tapes and other things that I think that is going to be the beginning of the end for this president.
Let's talk human terms. What's his human attitude towards this president?
I think he's very hurt, very bitter, and that because he's hurt and bitter, he's the most dangerous witness to have against you. I think he trusted this president. He felt he was conned into feeling like he was a son, and now he's been discarded. The president's calling him names, and this is a guy that was doing very questionable, unethical things for the president.
Glenn, a lot of this comes down to personal witness and interpretation. According to what we've heard before, the president told him, I want to pay off these women that he had affairs with, and I want it done to help me win this campaign. It was an implicit campaign contribution, according to Cohen. That's damning evidence.
And if you can remember, Chris, when the president was seen getting onto Air Force One, what did he tell the reporters? I don't know. You got to ask my lawyer, Michael Cohen. Guess what? Now everybody gets to ask his lawyer, Michael Cohen. And this drives home a couple of things. First of all, Cohen has obviously stuck with his decision not to become a formal cooperator, either with the Southern District of New York prosecutors or with the Mueller team. But he's sort of chosen to become America's cooperator, because now he's going to talk directly to the American people, and, you're going to have viewership that could rival a Super Bowl.
He knows a lot that he may not have to offer to the Congressional Committee. If he knows mob stuff, for example, right? He may not want to talk about that because of fear for his life. He may know Russian stuff for fear for his life. So he isn't, as you say, a fully cooperating witness.
And here's the trick bag that he's in. He still has a privilege against self-incrimination because, somewhat famously, you know, the Southern District of New York prosecutors were a little bit miffed because he wouldn't tell them everything that he did. So, you know, I think there is a concern here that if he begins testifying and then he starts to back up, refuses to answer questions, invokes a Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination, people might get frustrated. But, you know, like the Rev was saying, it seems like he is now in a place where he wants to tell it all. Perhaps privilege be damned.
If he spills his guts, Natasha, use a crude term, if he spills his guts, what's he got?
Well, one of the most interesting things that we have discovered from Lanny Davis's going out and discussing all of this in public, his lawyer, is that the turning point for Michael, as far as what he's been telling people, came when President Trump was standing on that stage with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki and sided with Putin and Russia over his own intelligence agencies when it came to Russia's election interference. That is the moment, according to Michael, according to Lanny Davis, when he decided that he needed to start speaking out against this president. Now, that makes me think that a lot of what he knows about the president is about his interactions with the Russians during 2016. Did he go
to Prague?
Did he go to Prague? He has denied that. I think it's important to point out he's denied it vociferously. But he also has, of course, a lot of information about potential campaign finance violations that the president committed and his implicitness in that. So I think that he has a lot to say about the general inner workings of the Trump organization. He has a lot to say potentially about whether or not Trump conspired with the Russians. But I do think that some of this is going to be a bit limited because he does not want to step on Mueller's toes.
But he's going to talk all about the two women.
I would imagine so. I imagine he's going to be grilled about that.
That's going to make news. Anyway, listen to here's what Lanny Davis, Michael Cohen's lawyer, once said about representing Cohen as he prepares for his testimony. He said this about Cohen, what he may say next month. Here he goes.
He'll answer the questions truthfully. What it was like working for Donald Trump. He has told me many times that nothing went on inside Trump Tower that Donald Trump didn't know. It was kind of a rotating door in and out of his office.
Congressman Quigley, run through what you're thinking right now about what this is going to offer the American public. I mean, the people, it's not just you and the committee and Congress. Everybody wants to know what Trump did now.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Besides great theater, the American people get to find out a little bit more about the connections between the Russians and the Trump associates. It's hard to tell exactly what he'll be able to communicate in this first open hearing, and I suspect what you'll see is a number of appearances by Mr. Cohen, including before my own Intelligence Committee. I suspect much of this could be classified, but we'll be asking the same questions your panel talked about. If he wasn't in Prague, why was his cell phone pinging off their towers? Is he being cute? Was he communicating near there? If he wasn't, who else was communicating with the Russians and where? The American public have a right to know. It's still going to be a while till we get the complete answer.
Let me ask you about what you think we're going to hear. For example, do you think it's possible you or another member of the committee might ask him simply, I've only got a few minutes here, Mr. Cohen, is there anything you want to tell us that we haven't asked about? I mean, he does have this plethora of information. He chatted away. I worked for people. If you work for somebody in a professional relationship, they chat about everything. He heard Trump talking like Popeye once in a while, blah, 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 about the Russians. He's heard everything that he said. Can you get that out of him?
Well, I suspect Mr. Cummings will be an outstanding chairman on this event. And I don't believe that it will get past Mr. Cummings to ask that question. What don't we know? What else can you tell us? Indeed, he is the only person, to my knowledge, who has that connection of the personal Trump world, financial and political worlds. And I think that's where the president's in trouble, because everything is connected. And for the first time, we have an opportunity to start tying all those questions together.
Let me go to Glenn Kirshner. What's the president worried about right now? He's there trying to flip it off. It didn't bother me with that hat on. He's kind of goofy down there, but he's acting like it didn't bother. Of course it's bothered him. His number one fixer, he had as his confidant all these years doing all the dirty work for him, paying off the women. The guy knows everything.
Yeah, and I don't want to go right to the salacious, but do we believe that all of that information he was buying from David Pecker at AMI involved only Karen McDougal? Are we going to hear about more, pardon the phrase, bimbo eruptions? You know, because there's so much that Cohen has been privy to over the decades that he's been involved with Trump. personally, professionally, the organization, perhaps even the foundation, that, I mean, I think Trump has got to be worried about everything he knows that Cohen knows about him.
Yeah, and every time the Reverend, this is the guy he goes to when he's in trouble.
Every time we've had battles with Trump down through the years in the civil rights community, Cohen was the guy that was said at the meeting, I've never met with Trump that Cohen wasn't in the room. So when you look at the fact that he was the guy that was the fixer when he had political or civil rights problems, when you look at that, he's proven he was dealing with these women. Why would we think he doesn't know everything Trump was doing? You don't bring in a side lawyer to do all of these kinds of things, that you have to trust him. And Cohen feels betrayed now, has all this information, and nothing to lose.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.